I raised my son with every sacrifice, $58,000 for college, a $25,000 truck, and even part of my savings. Last winter, he asked for $20,000 more and the rights to my $600,000 house. I said no. On my birthday, he sent me a $600 whiskey, knowing I couldn't drink. I gave it away, and someone ended up poisoned. That's when I realized the betrayal ran deeper than money. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. I sat alone in my Missouri living room, a space that still carries Evelyn's touch. The oak floor is the one I laid, plank by plank, back when my knees didn't argue. Her wedding photo rests on the mantel, gold frame warm in the afternoon light. Outside, the porch swing creaks, and the paint on the rail is chipping again. I make a note to send it and hear her laugh at my lists. On the coffee table sits a dish of coins and a key that fits no lock. I roll it in my fingers the way you turn a thought that will not settle. I think about the years when Caleb was small and every bill felt like a dare. I took overtime, then Saturdays, then roofs in the July heat, so he would never know want. I paid $58,000 to send him through college, believing a degree buys choices. I bought him a used pickup for $24,000 when he landed his first job. At his wedding, I wrote a check for $12,500 so the band could play their song. The house stayed modest. The savings grew slowly, like a tree that refuses to hurry. I salted away $240,000 in the credit union because discipline is a kind of love. I keep the receipts in a shoebox, not because numbers matter to anyone else, but because I need to remember what faith looks like on paper. Sometimes, when the kitchen clock grows loud, I lift the lid and read until my chest unclenches. Tonight I hold his framed diploma, wipe a thumb across the glass, and whisper, "Evelyn? Does he remember? Or was money always a bridge you build one way?" The question sits beside me, solid as the couch and twice as heavy. The furnace cycles on, a gentle hum under the floor, and the room smells faintly of lemon oil and dust. The line between us didn't snap in some dramatic scene. It frayed the way rope does, slow and mean, one thread at a time. First, he skipped Sunday dinner and sent a text at 9 saying work ran late. Then Thanksgiving arrived with a chair left empty and a pie that no one cut. By Christmas, the gifts sat under the tree until New Year's week, wrapped in red paper that dulled under the strings of white lights. It was the winter after my heart attack when the cardiologist looked over his glasses and told me to put down whiskey, put down salt, put down anything that treated my heart like a dare. Caleb stopped by on a Tuesday, carrying a promise in his voice. He said he needed $20,000 for a quick investment with a friend, a window that would close if we didn't jump, a sure thing if we moved fast. I asked for details, timelines, paperwork, and the names of the people I was supposed to trust. He pushed his phone across the table and showed me a logo and some arrows that went up. I told him I couldn't find a picture. He reminded me how much I loved him. I reminded him that love and caution can sleep in the same bed. He stared at the floor until the silence between us felt like a third person. I said no. The word surprised me with how small it sounded, like a nail dropped on concrete. After that, he didn't come around. Dinners thinned to nothing, holidays went quiet, and the clock on the wall ticked in a way that made the room feel wider. Sometimes I set a plate for him anyway, a habit my hands could not unlearn. I would look at the empty chair and hear it talk back. It said, "You chose." It said, "He noticed." In January, even the tree looked tired of pretending cheer. What was at stake sat in plain sight. My house is a straight-talking 3-bedroom ranch built in the mid-90s, brick front, vinyl siding, a roof I've replaced twice with buddies from church. The kitchen looks out on the backyard through a window over the sink where you can watch 2 maples throw down shade like old friends. In April, they pretend to be clouds. In October, they burn like they remember something the rest of us forgot. The county has it around 620,000 and change, and every time I open the letter, I feel the same little jolt, the one you get when you realize your life accrued value while you were fixing gutters. In the credit union, there is that slow, patient number, 240,000, a savings built from lunches packed at home and vacations skipped, from coffee made on the stove instead of bought on the way. There is a life insurance policy for 150,000 with me as the primary and our church listed after because Evelyn liked the way the choir sounded in winter, and I like the idea of heat paid forward. The mantel holds family photos in a row. In the one from his 16th summer, Caleb grins at the camera, grease on his hands, proud of a lawnmower he took apart and bullied back to life. I keep catching that boy's eyes and wondering where he went. When I think about money now, it feels less like numbers and more like weather. It can warm a room, and it can turn on you if you misjudge the wind. The part that hurts isn't the worry that I might lose a house or a balance. It's the way I feel like an obstacle in someone else's plan, the way my heartbeat sounds like a nuisance to a person I once carried on my shoulders. The dining table bears knife marks from projects and roasts. The box came on my 68th birthday, dropped at the door like any other package. The card said "Happy Birthday" in blue ink, no dad, no signature. And I knew the handwriting the way you know your own porch steps in the dark. Inside sat a limited release bottle, deep green label with gold letters, a wax seal, and glass heavy in the hand. Whiskey used to be my nightcap until the doctor told me to quit if I wanted more summers. Caleb knew that. He heard it in the hospital. I didn't open the bottle. I slid it to the far edge of the table and told myself someone else should taste it. Howard Carson could. Naomi's father fixes more than he says. When a storm peeled shingles off my roof, he showed up with a ladder before I found my gloves. I buckled the bottle into the passenger seat and drove it over. He smiled and said he'd save it for a night worth remembering. The next morning, my landline rang early. Howard had collapsed at breakfast. At St. Luke's, they said maybe food poisoning, maybe a heart rhythm issue. I hung up and stood in the kitchen listening to the refrigerator motor thrum. Something in me walked to the trash and lifted the lid. Near the bottom sat a small white plastic vial with a threaded cap, ghosted inside with powder. I didn't remember throwing it away. I shut the lid and opened the fridge, and there on the middle shelf behind the milk was a mason jar with an inch of whiskey I had poured so Howard could try it properly before I handed him the bottle. I held it up to the window. Amber light climbed the glass. It looked harmless. Most bad things do. I set it down like you set down something that could break a life. I could hear my own pulse in the quiet kitchen. I called Pete Lawson because I trust how he says what he finds, and because once, in winter, I pulled his truck from a ditch, and he still treats me like a man worth saving. His lab is a low brick place near the highway. He told me to come after closing and bring whatever I had. I wrapped the mason jar in a brown paper bag and drove with the radio off. Pete met me outside, took the bag, and said he'd call tomorrow. When tomorrow came, he spoke with the careful tone people use when a sentence will land hard. He found white snakeroot extract in the whiskey, a toxin that can steal a heartbeat, especially in someone with a bad heart or a pacemaker like Howard. He ran the test twice. The dose looked measured, not spilled. I sat at my kitchen table and pressed both hands flat so the room would know I was still there. I called Detective Ortiz and repeated what Pete had said and what I had found. He told me to document everything I could touch and everything I could remember. So I started writing my life into little rectangles, index cards. I wrote bottle on one and Howard ICU on another and copied the serial number in a careful line. I added a card that said front door thread after I taped a thin strip of white sewing thread across the inside threshold to catch any visitors while I was gone. I wrote trash bag flipped because the liner sat wrong when I looked for the vial. I slid the cards with a photo of the bottle into the fireproof box we bought for birth certificates and the deed. I closed the lid like a prayer. Then the anger came, steady and low, like water that decides it will wear down stone if it takes all year. I had spent years paying, fixing, giving. Now I had a problem to be solved, It was careful. It was cold. It stung. Pain turned into a plan through small choices. I stopped asking why and started asking how to keep anything from vanishing. I photographed the label, the seal, and the curl of wax. I wrote the courier's tracking number on an index card and tucked it in a clear sleeve. I called the bank to flag my accounts for any transfer over $2,000 and to require me in person for any name change. I changed the old PIN and said it out loud 3 times so my mouth would remember. I replaced the deadbolts and dropped the used screws in a cup, a reminder that habits come out best when you take your time. I set the fireproof box on the top shelf of the hall closet with the stepladder close by. I turned the shoebox of receipts into a map. I circled the year I paid $58,000 for tuition, the year I bought the pickup for $24,000, and the date of the wedding check for $12,500. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was guarding my memory. I opened the file drawer and found the deed, the appraisal that reads $620,000, and the life insurance paper for $150,000 with Evelyn's initials in the margin. I stacked them on the kitchen table and exhaled like a man who sees a path out of the woods. I wrote $20,000 refused last winter on a fresh card and slid it beside the bottle and the Howard ICU. Then I faced the woman in the gold frame. "Evelyn," I said, barely more than breath, "I'll see this through. Not for money, for truth." I let the words settle. I called Detective Ortiz and left a clear message that everything was secured and that I was ready for a formal statement. I put the receiver down and listened to the house breathe. Outside, the porch swing gave a single creak. I checked the thread on the door. Unbroken. That was enough for tonight. Tomorrow would belong to action. I set my shoes by the door, ready. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 1 below to let me know you're here with me. I woke to a colder kind of morning, the kind where coffee tastes like resolve. The white thread I taped across the inside of my front door lay straight as a ruler, a line only I would notice. I stood with my palm on the knob and let the house breathe around me. Yesterday was about learning what was being done to me. Today had to be about doing something back. I said it out loud so the promise would have edges. The porch swing creaked once and settled like a gavel. I set the fireproof box on the table and opened it slowly, the way you open something that remembers what you put inside. The top card read what Dr. Lawson told me, white snake root extract. The second card read what I told myself, keep moving. The first call went to the county office. After 2 transfers and a patient receptionist, I reached Assistant District Attorney Kim Turner. Her voice was brisk without being sharp, the kind of steady that cuts a knot without fraying the rope. I told her my name, the limited edition whiskey, the mason jar sample Dr. Lawson tested, the index cards, the thread on my door, and the porch swing that sometimes moved when the wind did not. I told her Detective Ortiz had my statement. She let me finish. Then she said, "Secure everything, Mr. Dalton. No improvising. We'll preserve what you have and build around it." She laid out a checklist like a carpenter laying out squares and levels. Keep the bottle sealed. Bag the mason jar. Print the photo of the white vial. Backup audio. Store duplicates in separate places. She asked if I was alone. I told her yes, and that alone is not the same as unprotected. She said she'd send preservation letters for neighborhood cameras if I could supply addresses and angles. I could. Then I called the credit union. I asked for the fraud desk and for a person who could hear that I was calm because I chose to be calm, not because I felt safe. A woman named Trina answered. We changed my PIN. We set alerts for any transaction over $2,000. We shut off every automatic transfer except utilities. We added a requirement that any wire demanded I stand at a teller window with my driver's license. She read my balances back, so there would be a timestamp in their system. A savings account that had grown to $240,000, checking that hovered like a bird over a fence rail. We enrolled a verbal passphrase. I chose something simple, Evelyn used to say, a word that would not fall out of my mouth by accident. Trina said, "If anyone calls to help you, hang up and dial the number on your card." I told her I would. Then I hung up and wrote a card that said, "Bank alert set. Wire lock, voice phrase." Backing up the evidence felt like setting tools after a long job. I photographed the bottle label and the serial number until the light behaved. I copied the photos and the audio from my pocket recorder onto 2 new USB drives. I wrapped blue painter's tape around each and wrote the date, the time, and the bottle plus audio. One drive went to the bottom of the fireproof box under the deed. The other I slid into the toe of a work boot on the top shelf of the hall closet, a place only a man who knows the weight of that boot would check. The mason jar went into a zip bag. I printed the photo of the little white pharmacy vial I found in my trash and tucked one copy under the bottle's foam cradle. I spoke a short sentence into the recorder, plain and slow, the way people read names at a memorial. Chain of custody remains unbroken. Saying it made my breath even out. By noon, I had done everything I could from my kitchen. That left the thing I least wanted and knew I had to do. I drove to Caleb's subdivision and parked 2 houses down. New street, young trees, sidewalks that hadn't learned chalk yet. Naomi's mailbox wears a tin rooster that spins when the wind thinks about it. His truck sat in the driveway, polished to a quiet shine. I rang the bell and watched my shoes. When my son opened the door, his face changed 3 times before words arrived. Surprise, calculation, politeness. He said I should have called. I said I did not come for company. I came to see his eyes when I said Howard's name. The kitchen looked like a catalog: quartz top, neutral backsplash, stainless sink. On the counter, a line of 3 bottles stood shoulder to shoulder, different brands from the one he sent me. None open. The room smelled like lemon cleaner. I told him Howard was in the hospital and the doctors were serious. He looked toward the faucet and said that was terrible. He asked if they knew the cause. I said they had theories. I reminded him I do not drink and that the bottle he sent sits sealed now. He gave me the old patient smile, the one that used to help him beat curfew. It was a gift for you to enjoy. I let the word enjoy hang. Then I asked an ordinary question in an ordinary tone. Where did you keep the bottle before you mailed it? He shrugged. On the middle shelf near the mixers. I smiled just enough to pass for gentle. Funny, I said. I never told you the note mentioned a middle shelf. For the smallest slice of a second, the room froze while the heat stayed. His jaw flexed. He reached for a towel and dried a glass that was already dry. You get chatty when you're sentimental, he said, aiming casual. I had what I came for, not a confession, but its shadow. I slid the towel back and told him I was going to the hospital. At the door, he said I should rest. I told him I sleep when the truth lets me. In the truck, I pressed stop on the recorder and placed it on the seat like you set down a full cup. Back home, I set papers on the table. The deed with $620,000 typed neatly. The savings statement for $240,000. The life insurance letter is for $150,000. Once those numbers felt like warmth. Today, they looked like an equation a cruel person could do in his head. I pictured those numbers without my stubborn breath in the room and understood why a man might decide a bottle was worth the try. Fear tried to climb the back of my neck. I leaned both palms on the table until my hands remembered who they belonged to. Then I wrote another card. Assets equal target. That evening, I carried a stack of home repair magazines to St. Luke's and sat with Naomi while Howard slept under a warmed blanket. The monitor sang that small electronic lullaby the heart learns to trust. Naomi looked like a person who had held her breath too long. In the hallway, she spoke low and fast, as if the words would run if she paused. She said Caleb kept jars on a shelf in the garage, dried plants, and masking tape labels in his handwriting. She said he joined online groups about herbal extraction. She said she had seen a rough sketch of WSR on a cardboard flap, the letters penned heavy, like a child pressing too hard on paper. She stared at the floor. He said it was nothing, she whispered. He said it was for a friend. I told her to keep her phone close and to say as little as she needed to say until Detective Ortiz asked her questions in a room where cameras were present. When I got home, I did small work to keep from unraveling. I wiped the counters in clean lines. I swept grit into the dustpan and rinsed it away like a ritual. I checked the thread and smiled when it lay exactly where I set it, patient and white. I wrote to Ms. Turner, copying Ortiz. I asked for preservation letters to the neighbors on either side and to the city camera at the corner. I included the afternoon and time I noticed the porch swing move without wind. I described the garage shelf Naomi had described and the sketch of WSR. Ortiz called within 10 minutes. He told me to avoid private meetings and to record any contact. Do not invite him into your line of sight, he said, and do not step into his, I promised. Promises matter when they keep you breathing. Morning flattened the light and made my kitchen look like a realtor's flyer. I drove to the courthouse annex and met Ms. Turner in a windowless room that smelled like paper and hard work. She wore a navy blazer and the steady expression of someone who carries 10 things at once. We reviewed my list. She asked how my heart was behaving. I told her I walk the block twice a day and do what the nurse taught me when my chest tightens. Ms. Turner slid a single page across the table. A clean checklist. Chain of custody notes, names with dates, times on every photo, locations for every item, initials on each seal. She underlined 3 words. No improvising, ever. I signed where she pointed. This is how we win, she said, tapping the column labeled dates. We do not guess. We show our work. 2 messages reached me that afternoon. The first came from Ortiz. Preservation letters sent, it read. City camera flagged. Keep the thread. The second came from Caleb. He wrote that he hoped I was sleeping. He wrote that I had always been suspicious. He wrote that conspiracy talk could give me another heart event. He closed with love. You? I copied the words onto a card and underlined the part where he told me what to feel. I placed the card in the box. Even sentences that bruise can be useful later if you keep them from walking off. Around dusk, the door whispered. No knock, no shadow in the glass, just paper sliding across wood like a quiet threat. I waited a full minute before I moved. The white thread along the threshold lay unbroken, which meant the person on my stoop knew exactly where to stop. I picked up the envelope. It weighed almost nothing. Inside was a single page torn from a yellow legal pad. 3 words in thick black marker, written the way a person tries to make his voice sound bigger. You chose him. No signature, no address. The mark of a coward is how he loves a permanent marker and a short sentence. The words turned the room colder. I felt anger step into my ribs the way a man steps into boots. I slid the page into a clear sleeve and wrote the time and the description on a new card. Then I printed the sentence that had formed in my head like a headline. Control is greater than money. It fit everything I had seen. The $20,000 I refused last winter had been about money. This was about power. Who holds it? Who refuses to hand it over? I fed the sleeves into the fireproof box and turned the key until it clicked. Outside, the porch light warmed the concrete into a small stage. The swing moved once. No wind. I went to the door and looked through the peephole at an empty street that didn't feel empty. Before I could sit down, the doorbell chirped that cheap, high scream it was born to chirp. On the mat sat a padded envelope, big as a paperback, no return address. My name spelled right. I did not touch it. I called Ortiz, put the phone on speaker, and described what I was seeing the way a witness should. Simple, steady, no guesses. He told me to wait on the stoop and not touch the package. He said an officer was already near. Officer Patel rolled up quietly, camera in one hand, gloves in the other. He photographed the package where it lay, then lifted it gently and listened the way bomb techs and parents listen, half to the thing, half to the air. He slipped it into a second mailer and nodded. We'll log it, he said. If there's a note or a print, We want it to belong to the right person, not to you." I watched his taillights disappear and felt the house exhale. Sleep did not come when called, so I did small work to flirt with it. I washed 2 mugs and set them upside down on a towel so the last drops would think about leaving. I folded the blanket on the couch the way Evelyn liked, corners lined, stripes aligned. I checked the deadbolts and pressed my palm to each window I had latched. I opened the fireproof box one more time and slid the new card beside the others. Then I placed Ms. Turner's checklist under the stack, the way you put a firm board under a soft mattress. I set the key where Evelyn used to keep her hairpins and told the gold-edged wedding photo what I had promised in the hospital that last hard week. "I will keep this house honest," I said. Saying it out loud steadied my hands. In the morning, an email from Ms. Turner waited. The subject line read, "Preservation requests filed." She said the judge she works with honors careful people. She asked me to confirm again that I would not meet my son alone. I wrote back yes and added that Officer Patel had collected a padded envelope last night. A minute later, Ortiz called. The package held a printed photograph of my porch taken from across the street in the dark, the swing centered in the frame. No note, no smudge he could see. "Someone wants to be seen without being seen," he said. "We'll work on that." I wrote a fresh card, porch photo, no return, collected by Patel. When I put the pen down, my hand didn't shake. By noon, I understood the day had given me all the control it would give inside 4 walls. I put on the jacket I wear when I want to be believed and drove back to the annex to sign a set of papers Ms. Turner prepared. They documented where the bottle had lived and when and who had seen it. They recorded the timestamps on my audio and my photos. They acknowledged the chain from my hands to hers to the state lab. "Paper makes memories behave," she said. "Paper will carry what your voice should not have to." I thanked her and paid attention to how good it felt to sit at a table where the law held the pen. On the way home, I drove slowly through Caleb's neighborhood and did not stop. You learn to sense when your presence is a match near dry leaves. I kept the window cracked and let November air bring me back to myself. At my kitchen table, I gathered the cards into a neat stack and read them one by one like a catechism. Bottle, mason jar, white vial photo, Howard ICU. 20,000 refused last winter. Bank alerts set. Do not meet him alone. You chose him. Control is greater than money. Porch photo collected. Saying each title was like tapping studs behind drywall, proof that the wall would hold what needed holding. Evening drifted in. The furnace kicked on and made its low, kind sound. I reheated soup and ate it at the counter because a table can feel like company, and I'd had enough company from ghosts for one day. I called Naomi and left a message that said nothing dangerous. I told her I was thinking of Howard and hoping for an easy night. A few minutes later, she texted a photograph of the garage shelf from months ago, jars lined up, masking tape labels in her handwriting because she likes things neat when she's anxious. "I took this when we cleaned for spring," she wrote. I saved the image and the metadata and sent both to Ortiz and Ms. Turner, another stud in the wall. I ended the day the way I started it, with my hand on the doorframe and my eyes on the white thread. Still there. Still telling the truth. I could feel a boundary in me matching the boundary on the floor. A day ago, I was a father in shock. Tonight, I was a man who had moved his feet. The padded envelope and the photo and the marker words were meant to rattle me. They did, for a while. Now they read like a list of mistakes made by someone who believes fear is permanent. It isn't. It visits. It leaves. Determination is the one who pays rent. Just before dawn, the landline rang once and stopped, like a rehearsal for a call that might matter later. I logged the time and the number and went back to the kitchen. Outside the window, the maples threw down a silence only trees can manage. I made oatmeal, ate 3 bites, and cleaned the pan because a clean sink puts a man ahead of his next choice. I stood in the doorway and spoke toward the mantel. "Evelyn," I said softly, "they think I'm weak because my heart needs watching. They're about to learn I take notes, and I don't miss." Saying her name did not hurt the way it used to. It steadied the air. When I finally sat, the house felt less like a target and more like a place I chose. The thread at the door was still white. The swing outside was still. The phone lay face down, quiet. The next steps were no longer mine to shove. They belonged to paper, to the lab, to Ms. Turner's checklists, and Ortiz's patient work. I had moved from hurt to strategy, from fear to a watchful control that fits in the palm like a familiar tool. Then the door alarm chirped twice, quick and high. I reached the hall in 3 steps, the phone already in my hand. The front thread was unbroken. The sound came from the back. On the kitchen door, wedged between handle and frame, a folded sheet waited in thick black ink that bled through the paper. 3 words I already knew how to hate. Stop letting them in. I took a photograph before I touched it, slid the note into a sleeve, and called Ortiz. As I read the words to him, the porch swing moved once without wind, and I understood the line I had drawn was about to be tested by a warrant with teeth. I set a new card on the stack and wrote the only sentence I needed for tomorrow. The door stays shut unless help can prove its name. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 2 below to let me know you're here with me. At 7:43 in the morning, the knock came, firm and deliberate, the kind of sound paperwork makes when it turns into authority. I checked the thin white thread I had taped across the bottom of my front door. It lay still, exactly where I left it, a quiet witness. When I opened up, Detective Ortiz stood there with 2 officers and a clear plastic sleeve. Inside was a warrant signed by a judge whose name I remembered from jury duty years ago. Ortiz kept his voice low and even, the way a man speaks when he wants your heart to match his calm. "Mr. Hale," he said, "we're serving the warrant at your son's house. You are not to go there. Leave every contact to us. Keep your phone with you. If anyone comes here, you call." I nodded. I did not trust my voice not to say every wrong thing a father could say when a day like this finally arrives. Ortiz glanced at the white thread, then back at me, his mouth a line that understood more than it said. "We'll be in touch," he added, and turned. The uniforms fell in behind him, and the cruiser eased away from my curb like a punctuation mark rolling off the page. When they pulled away, I stood in the doorway a beat longer than necessary and watched the taillights blink at the stop sign. The house felt like it was holding its breath, the way a place does when the weather is about to break. I made coffee out of habit and let it go cold on the counter. I set my fireproof box on the kitchen table and opened it like a small bank vault. Inside were the index cards I had been writing since the bottle arrived. Happy birthday in his handwriting. The sealed whiskey, wax unbroken. The mason jar is half full. Photo of a white plastic vial. Credit union fraud locks confirmed. Porch photo, no face in frame. I read them the way a man reads a psalm when he's not sure what else to say. Then I closed the lid and laid my palm flat on the warm metal. "Hold," I told it and myself. My phone buzzed at 8:19. "Naomi." "They're here," she wrote. No exclamation point, no extras. I pictured her in their hallway with the bedroom door mostly shut, the sound of boots on the garage slab like a slow drum. Ortiz had told me not to start a back and forth, only respond if she asks a direct question. I typed, "I'm with you," and erased it. I typed, "I am praying," and erased that too. I set the phone face down and watched the second hand crawl around the stove clock until it felt like an ally again. At 9:02, Ortiz called. He sounded like a man reading from a list he wished did not exist. 3 mason jars on a garage shelf, he said. Masking tape labels. One read WSR, one read rootstock, one read tincture. They were bagging them and taking photographs. There was a notebook on the workbench, handwriting that looked like the labels, with dates, small symbols, and initials next to numbers. He could not give me the details until it was logged, but he told me to breathe. I set my palm flat on the counter and asked if Naomi was safe. He said yes. He would have an officer sit with her while they finished the search. "We're laying track," he said, and hung up. I walked the length of the house and back because my legs needed work more than my head did. On my third pass, the doorbell gave its thin cry. Through the glass, I saw the mail carrier walking away. A certified letter lay on the mat with a green sticker like a bruise. I signed with a hand that had learned to be steady and opened it at the counter. Inside was a single page from the credit union confirming the fraud locks I had requested the day before. No wire transfers without my face at a teller window. Alerts on every withdrawal over $2,000. New pins on every card. The language was dry as cardboard, and it steadied me. Numbers and switches and locks, all the small ways a man can tell his life he intends to keep it. At 10:11, Naomi texted a line that made my skin go hot and cold in the same breath. "They're photographing a sketch on the garage wall," she wrote. "A tree with its roots circled. Ortiz says it matters." I could see it without closing my eyes. A trunk, branches, a crown, and the roots ringed like an answer key. Family turned into a diagram. Control drawn in pencil. I stood by the mantel and looked at Evelyn's wedding photo, the one with her hair pinned up and the laugh she saved for the end of the day. "You seeing this, Ev?" I asked the question. He drew roots and circled them. The porch swing out front did not move. The furnace clicked on and off like a patient machine that remembers its job. By 11, Ortiz called again. They recovered an envelope addressed to me that had not been sealed. Inside was my name at the top, and at the bottom you'll understand why when it's over. Between them was a simple drawing of a tree with its roots circled. The same hand that labeled the jars had drawn the sketch. They also collected measuring spoons with residue, a stainless funnel, and a coffee filter stained the color of weak tea. The state lab would need time, he said, but the pieces we had were already growing teeth. I said thank you to a man who did not need thanks and hung up because I could taste metal at the back of my tongue. Just before noon, my landline rang. "Unknown," the display said. I let it fall to voicemail and pressed play with the volume down. A man's voice, tight and careful, spoke 8 words that put a hard underline under the day. "A court won't buy a weak father's story. They'll say you're framing your own son." The line cut to silence like a cable snapped. I replayed it twice, then wrote it word for word on an index card. Every letter, every pause. I slid the card into a sleeve and called Ada Kim Turner. I read it to her like I was reading a weather warning. She told me to forward the audio and to sit if I could. "This kind of message is meant to push you off your feet," she said. "We are going to make sure you keep standing." At 12:37, Naomi sent a picture she had taken months ago of the very shelf the officers were standing in front of. 3 jars in a neat row, masking tape labels written dark. In the bottom right corner, on a scrap of cardboard, the letters WSR were sketched twice, each circled the way a boy circles a word when he is proud of knowing it. I saved the image and sent it to Ortiz and to Ms. Turner with the date visible. Ortiz replied 2 minutes later, "This helps." Then he wrote, "We are in transport." I knew what those 4 words meant without asking. They had Caleb, cuffs on, an officer on each elbow, a car door shutting like a verdict with the sound taken out. While I waited for the next call, the house took on a quiet I cannot name. Not calm, not comfort, more like the stillness that spreads across a field at dusk when a fox is already on the move and every small thing knows it. I made a sandwich and tasted none of it. I rinsed the plate because Evelyn would have. I set my driver's license and my deed copy on the table because Ms. Turner had asked me to have them ready for an affidavit about assets and ownership. The numbers on the paper looked both ordinary and heavy, the way a street address looks when an ambulance parks in front of it. At 1:08, a black and white eased to a stop in front of my place. I stepped back from the window so I would not turn into a face to wave at. Ortiz came to the door with Officer Patel. He looked like a man who had carried a heavy box up a long staircase. They had booked Caleb, he said. Caleb asked for counsel. Attorney Mercer would meet him at the station. Ortiz sat at my table and set a small recorder between us. He needed my formal statement on everything that had arrived since dawn. I spoke in short, straight lines. The certified letter, the voicemail, the timestamps on Naomi's texts. He nodded without interrupting, the way you nod for a witness whose words will have to stand up under lights. I asked what the notebook said, and he shook his head because rules move more slowly than curiosity. He told me what would be in the affidavit, pages with dates and little shapes, initials next to numbers, one page that read HC, a triangle, and a smaller number, another that read WH, a whole number that did not contain mercy, dosage notes with asterisks, which he said meant watch for delay in effect, a sketch of a funnel, a line about masking a bitter note with oak. He put his pen down and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Mr. Hale," he said, "I want you to hear me. You did not cause this by telling the truth." We signed the chain of custody forms for the items I had provided, the sealed bottle, the mason jar half full, the photo of the vial, the porch picture. I initialed the seals with the same looping signature I have used since I was 17. Ms. Turner called while Ortiz was still here. She spoke in that steady way that makes a chest remember how to move. The state lab had finished its confirmation and named the plant and the extract by their proper names. White snake root, quantified at a level that would drop a man with a pacemaker or a heart like mine. She said the words cleanly and did not try to soften them. "We'll present charges today," she said. "Bail conditions tomorrow. After that, we prepare you for a probable cause hearing." At 2:30, I sat on the back steps with a mug of tea I did not drink and watched the maple lay its shadow across the grass like a kind hand. The porch swing held still. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once and then changed its mind. I tried to name what lived in me. Relief, yes. Grief, yes. Anger that came and went like a quick summer cloud. A sort of emptiness that was not hollow, more like a space cleared by force. I thought about the notebook line with my initials, WH. I thought about what would have happened if I had taken a birthday sip to be polite to an old habit. I pictured Howard Carson in a hospital bed, the monitor tracing out the stubborn line of a man who keeps breathing because the job is not finished. "We're not done," I told the air. The yard listened the way yards do, without judgment. At 3:05, the phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed the number for the public defender's office, even though Mercer is private. An administrator asked me to confirm that I would not speak with the defendant without counsel present. I said I would not speak with him at all unless ordered by the court. She thanked me and ended the call. I understood. Clean lines around everything. Later, no one could say I had pushed or baited or tried to rewrite what had already been written in his hand. At 3:40, Ms. Turner emailed a draft affidavit. It read like a careful story told in square sentences, built to carry weight. On the morning of, at approximately, recovered, labeled, logged, photographed. It listed each item, the jars, the notebook, the sketch of the tree with circled roots, the envelope addressed to me, the funnel, and the filter. It cited the lab by name and the statute by number. It stated the asset values because motive shows up in numbers, whether you like it or not. When I reached the line that named my house and the amount of my savings, I felt the oddest mix of shame and relief. Shame that the numbers could become a reason. Relief that the numbers could become a reason someone else would understand. At 4:12, Ortiz texted 2 words, "Transport complete." A minute later, Naomi wrote that they had taken him and that he looked toward my street when he got into the car. I typed back words about responsibility and choice, then erased them because sermons are not what she needed from me. I sent a line that said, "I am praying for you and for Howard." She replied with a photo of a receipt she had found in the garage trash for a prepaid phone bought 2 towns over, dated the week before Howard collapsed. I told her to put it in a zip bag, leave it on the kitchen counter, and let Ortiz collect it. She sent a small thumbs up and then nothing more, which was the kind of silence I could live with. Evening came early. The light turned flat, then blue, then gray. I made an omelet and ate half. I washed the pan and let it dry in the rack because some routines still feel like a promise you can keep. I sat in my chair by the front window, not to watch the street, but to watch my breathing. The anonymous voicemail kept floating to the top of the pond in my head. A court won't buy a weak father's story. They'll say you're framing your own son. I repeated the sentence until the words lost the edge they meant to carry. Then I said out loud to the empty room, I am not weak. I am still here. At 7:15, Ms. Turner called to lay out the plan for the next 2 days. She would file the formal charges tonight. Tomorrow they would argue bail with conditions. No contact, no approach within 500 feet of my house. GPS if the judge granted release. She would prepare me for a probable cause hearing that would preview the testimony. She warned me that Mercer was known for making fog out of family hurt. He would try to waive a handwriting report if he could find a man to sign one. He would bring up the $20,000 I did not hand over last winter. He would say the boy I raised had become a man starved for his father's approval and that I had shut the door. We will not chase feelings, she said. We will put dates and objects and numbers on the table. We will let a jury hear them one by one. Night set down fully. I locked the doors again, though I had already locked them. I opened the fireproof box and placed the signed affidavit inside. I touched Evelyn's ring with one finger and told her what Ms. Turner had said about guardrails and fog. They think character is leverage, I said into the kitchen, as if the room were interested. Mine is steel. Saying it did not feel like bragging. It felt like saying the name of a tool I knew how to use. Just after 9, a final message arrived, the one that nailed the date to the wall. It came from Caleb's number, even though I knew his phone was already in a property bag at the station. Maybe it had been scheduled. Maybe someone else had access. It read, "You think anyone will believe a bitter old man with a bad heart? Try me." I did not answer. I wrote the words down with the time and the number and slid the card into its sleeve. I set the phone face down and listened to the furnace breathe. Morning came clear and cold. I drove to the courthouse annex with both hands, placed where a high school instructor taught me years ago because habits can be anchors. The annex smelled like floor wax and paper. Ms. Turner met me in a small room with a laminate table that had collected the elbows of 1,000 worried people. She handed me a printed copy of the charges and a pen that wrote in a confident line. Attempted murder, possession of a controlled toxic substance, evidence tampering. She read each line, then looked me in the eye. "This is the right road," she said, "and I know it is a hard one." We rehearsed my testimony the way a choir rehearses a hymn, not for emotion, not for tremor, but for breath and order. Where did the bottle come from? Where did you keep it? Why did you hand it to Howard instead of pouring it yourself? How did you learn about the poison? Who did you call first? What did you save? What did the police collect? What did the lab confirm? When she asked, "What is your relationship to the defendant?" I answered in the only words that fit. "He is my son." She nodded and did not make me add anything else. She reminded me that the goal was not to win an argument, but to lay down a road of facts a jury could drive without skidding. Back at the house, I raked leaves into low piles and bagged them, tied each with twine, and dragged them to the curb. Work like that sets a metronome in a chest. I oiled the hinges on the back door and checked the batteries in the smoke detector. I wiped the sink until it shone because order is its own comfort. I stood on the porch with my hands in my jacket pockets and looked down the block where the carriers walked and the school bus would make it stop. I thought about the word normal until it lost its edges, then went back inside. Late afternoon, Ortiz stopped by to install a small camera above my front door. He showed me the phone app, how to check the feed, how to download clips, how to send them to his secure link. He walked the perimeter and pointed to sight lines and angles. The lab had lifted one partial print from the spare key recovered in Caleb's tin. Not enough to carry a case on its own, he said. Strong when it stands with friends. Evidence likes company. Give it friends, and it behaves in court. He asked if I was sleeping. Sometimes, I told him. He nodded, then tightened the last mounting screw a quarter turn more. After he left, I sat at the kitchen table and looked at my stack of cards the way a farmer looks at a finished fence at dusk. It was not pretty. It did not have to be. It had to be true. I laid the anonymous voicemail on top. Beneath it, I placed the prepaid receipt Naomi found. Beneath that, I added the garage photo she had saved months ago without knowing it would become a lifeline. Then I wrote one more card, slow and deliberate, because the speed of my hand had to match the seriousness of my promise. They think character is leverage. Mine is steel. See you in court. Evening pressed its weight against the windows. The porch swing did not move. The thread under the door lay white as chalk. I turned off the lamp and stood there longer than I needed to, listening to the furnace cycle and to a neighborhood that prefers its gossip to be wrong. I locked the door again, even though I had already locked it, and I told the quiet what Ms. Turner had said because saying it out loud made the road feel more real. Details are the guardrails, I said to an empty kitchen. They will keep me on the road. Sleep came in short slices, but it came. I woke before dawn with the feeling that a storm had passed and left the boards damp. The air was sharp and clean. Ms. Turner called at 8 to say the charges had officially been posted and that the bail hearing would be set for the morning after next. She reminded me to keep every screenshot and every scrap and to eat breakfast made of food and not of news. I made oatmeal, the old-fashioned kind that takes longer than the microwave wants it to, and I ate it with raisins because that is how Evelyn made it when winter set its shoulders. Around 10, Ortiz called with one more detail that felt like a final bolt sliding home. The carrier records on the anonymous message matched a prepaid device bought with cash at a hardware store on a road I know too well, a road that runs between my neighborhood and Caleb's. The purchase time lined up with camera footage the department had preserved from the corner gas station. A figure with my son's build walked to the counter, paid cash, and kept his head down. Ortiz said he would let the prosecutor's office gather the rest of the chain before they showed it to a judge. Every piece is a friend to the others, he said. We put them together, and they tell the story without heat. By late day, I stood on the porch and watched the school bus stop at the corner, the brake lights winking the way brake lights do at the end of a long route. Children ran to the ends of driveways. Parents waved from porches. The world looked ordinary in a way that felt like a blessing. A neighbor raised a hand, and I raised mine. I thought about the word ordinary until it lost its edge, and then I went inside and wrote one more sentence in my notebook, not an index card this time, something for me alone. Justice is not the same as peace. It is the bridge you have to cross to reach it. When night fell, I checked the new camera on my phone. The feed showed my own porch light turning the steps amber. The timestamp sat in the corner like a small square of certainty. I set the phone down and lay on the couch. The quiet felt earned. I thought about the jars and the labels and the triangle beside HC and the whole number beside WH. I thought about the sketch of a tree on a garage wall and how a single circle around roots can tell you everything you need to know about control. I thought about the noon message that tried to turn me into a villain. A court won't buy a weak father's story. They'll say you're framing your own son. I let the words sit where they could no longer bruise anything important. Then I closed my eyes and pictured Evelyn's hand on my shoulder, and Howard's heartbeat on a monitor, and Naomi standing in a hallway she never asked to stand in. That is how the day closed, with a house that chose to keep me, a box that held the story straight, and a plan that did not wobble when someone tried to blow on it. The warrant had given the day its teeth. The evidence had given it bones. The threats had given it skin, and the quiet had given it a heart that still beat where it belonged. I turned out the last light and let darkness take the room, knowing morning would bring a new set of steps, and that I was ready to climb them one at a time, steady as a man who knows which side of the law the road runs on. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, Please comment 3 below to let me know you're here with me. I remember the morning light filtering through the courthouse windows, pale and cold, like it was afraid to touch the oak panels inside. The room smelled faintly of polish and old paper, the kind of place where lives get measured in words, testimony, and verdicts. My palms were dry on the folder I carried, not because I was nervous anymore, but because I had already passed nervous and arrived at something harder. This was the day my son would sit across from me in a courtroom, and this was the day the truth would be weighed against blood. The district attorney opened with a voice that carried the weight of the evidence. She spoke plainly. This case is about trust and control. It is about a father who refused to hand over $20,000 and the son who saw $620,000 locked in a house, $240,000 in savings, and a $150,000 life insurance policy as obstacles in his way. It is about a poisoned bottle wrapped as a gift. Every word landed like a nail into wood, steady and precise. Mercer, the defense attorney, leaned forward with that smug kind of calm lawyers like him, Polish over the years. He painted me as bitter, a father who never moved on from loss, a man who sold off his farm and carried resentment into old age. He spoke of handwriting experts ready to testify that the words "Happy Birthday" on the card were not conclusively Caleb's. He leaned into the jury with that slippery smile and told them not to confuse grief with fact. I sat still, not because his words did not sting, but because I knew the weight of truth would not vanish under paint. Howard Carson testified first. He walked slowly, still a bit shaky, but his voice carried enough to fill the room. He told them about the bitter taste, how he thought it was his heart giving out, how he told his wife to call an ambulance because something didn't sit right in his chest. He said, "Turns out it wasn't my heart, it was someone else's idea." The silence after that sentence held more power than a sermon. Detective Ortiz followed. He laid out the phone records, burner texts with words you couldn't mistake. Make sure he gets it all in the first pour. Won't take much with his heart. The jury shifted in their seats. Some looked down at their notes. Others looked straight at Caleb. Ortiz was steady, his answers crisp, no theatrics. Dr. Lawson took the stand and explained the toxicology, walking them through how white snake root was processed, the precision of the measurements, and the way this wasn't an accident or a mistake from a hobby gone wrong. He used simple terms, but never simplified the intent. This was deliberate, he said, and he looked at the jury when he said it. Naomi's voice cracked once when she testified, but she steadied herself. She showed the photo she had taken months earlier of the garage shelf, 3 jars in a neat line, masking tape labels clear as day. She told them about the online group Caleb had been part of, about the herbal extraction posts, about the time she had walked into the garage and seen notebooks with symbols she didn't understand. Her voice carried both hurt and relief, the kind of tone that told the jury she was tired of carrying secrets. When it was my turn, I walked to the stand with my index cards in my pocket, the way a man carries tools. I told the story from the beginning, the bottle, the birthday, the gift I didn't drink, Howard's collapse, the mason jar, the vial, the notes I wrote down one by one. I held up the card that said $20K refused last winter and the one that said envelope, you'll understand why. I explained what each meant, not with drama, but with the kind of clarity that comes when you've rehearsed it alone in your kitchen until you could recite it in your sleep. Mercer tried to shake me. He leaned in with that voice lawyers use when they think they can turn you around. "You haven't seen your son's handwriting in years," he said. "You can't be sure it was his. You're mistaken. You want to see guilt where there is none." He held up a report, stamped with some expert's name. I looked at him, then at the jury, and I said slowly, "The bottle is real. The jars are real. The texts are real. Those don't confuse. Those don't mistake themselves." My words hung in the air like iron. Mercer tried to cut back in, but the judge held up a hand. The jury saw a man not trying to argue, but to state what simply is. The district attorney struck back with chain of custody records, metadata from Naomi's photos, lab confirmations stamped by the state. And then came the hammer, the notebook pages, the ones with HC beside a triangle, WH beside a number high enough to make the jury flinch, the careful dosage notes, the funnel, the filter. The jury leaned forward as each page was shown, projected on the screen, one by one. It was like watching bricks being laid into a wall, each making escape less possible. When the verdict came, it felt like the air itself paused. Guilty of attempted murder. The judge's voice echoed in the paneled room. Sentenced to 25 years, with no chance of early release until 50 years had passed. Caleb stood there, his shoulders hunched, his mouth moving with words only he could hear. When the bailiff turned him, I caught the whisper. This isn't the last chapter. The chains at his wrists clicked like punctuation marks. I walked out of that courtroom not lighter, but different. Victory doesn't erase loss. It doesn't erase the fact that my son had seen me as an obstacle to be removed. But it does draw a line, a boundary between what happened and what will not happen again. Outside, the Missouri air felt sharper, like the world had cleared its throat. In the weeks that followed, I met with an estate planner. We updated every document. The life insurance beneficiary was changed to a trust for the church choir and the local veterans community, places Evelyn had loved. Every power of attorney loophole was locked shut. My savings stayed where they belonged, protected by alerts and layers of verification. The house, still valued around $620,000, became less a target and more a home again. I heard through Ortiz that Caleb's supplies had come from a cousin of Naomi's who did landscaping, but that Caleb was the one who chose to use it, to turn something from the soil into something meant to end lives. The cousin had sold roots, not plans. The plan had been all my son's. That knowledge burned, but it also clarified. At night, I sat on my porch swing and let the creak of the chains fill the quiet. Peace didn't come all at once. Justice had been given, but peace was something I had to build, plank by plank, just like the floor inside my house. Some evenings, I whispered to Evelyn's picture on the mantel, "We're safe now. That's what matters." As for Caleb, word reached me that he spent his first weeks inside trying to make friends, but even in there, betrayal carries a smell. No one trusts a man who poisons his own blood. Naomi moved into a small apartment, close to her parents, carrying her own scars. I wished her healing, even if we never spoke again. One evening, the phone rang, a collect call from the prison. I let it go. Another night, a letter arrived, his handwriting cramped and uneven, asking for forgiveness. I held it, read the first line, and then set it back in the envelope. I did not burn it. I did not answer it. I simply placed it in the fireproof box with all the other evidence of what had been. Because sometimes the best answer is silence. I told myself quietly, I don't need him anymore. I have myself. I began to find joy in small things. Saturday mornings at the farmer's market, coffee with neighbors who had sat quietly through the trial and now greeted me with respect. I tended to the maples in the backyard, trimming branches, stacking wood. Each action reminded me I was not broken, only scarred, and scars can tell their own story. The lesson grew clearer the more I lived it. Blood is not always family. Family is the ones who respect your dignity, who protect you instead of plotting against you. Self-respect is not selfish. It is the only shield some of us will ever get to carry. The truth, however painful, is always better than the comfort of a lie. These are simple truths, but they take a lifetime to learn. I often thought about what Evelyn would say if she had sat beside me through all of it. I could almost hear her voice, not soft, but steady. "You did right," she would say. "You stood for yourself. That's all anyone can ask." And I would nod in the quiet room, grateful for a memory that still had weight. The house no longer felt like a battleground. It felt like home again. The photos on the mantel smiled back at me without turning into accusations. The savings statement from the credit union read like protection, not temptation. Even the porch swing creaked like it was happy to carry me. As I close this chapter, I know the journey isn't over. There will always be echoes of what happened, shadows on certain days. But I also know this: I have crossed the bridge from survival to peace. I have learned that justice can be delivered in a courtroom, but peace must be built inside yourself. And I am building it, one quiet morning at a time. Somewhere inside me, I still hear Caleb's words. This isn't the last chapter. But now I understand. He was wrong. The last chapter belongs to me. It always did. And as I sat on that porch swing, the maples throwing their evening shadows across the lawn, I let myself imagine the next small step. Maybe a volunteer group at the church, maybe a letter to the veterans community offering my time. Maybe simply another day of waking up, brewing coffee, and knowing the house is mine. Whatever it is, it will be written in my hand, not his. I have learned that peace is not something that drops into your lap the moment a judge's gavel falls. It is something you build piece by piece, day after day, like a floor you sand until it is smooth enough to walk barefoot. After the trial ended, after Caleb was sentenced and the weight of his betrayal was laid out for strangers to see, I did not wake up feeling free. I woke up feeling hollow. But in that hollow space, I found room to start again. The first thing I did was repair the porch swing. The chain had squeaked for years, a sound Evelyn used to tease me about, but I had left it alone because I was always too tired, too busy, too wrapped in the daily storm. One Saturday morning, I oiled the hinges, tightened the bolts, and let myself sit on it as the wood shifted quietly under me. That simple act felt like reclaiming something ordinary, and ordinary felt like a gift. On the small table beside me, I placed two objects I never thought I would keep. One was the glass Howard had used that terrible night. The other was the tiny vial Dr. Lawson returned to me once the evidence was logged and filed. They were not trophies. They were reminders. One reminded me that life is fragile, the other that people can choose cruelty. Together, they reminded me why I needed to choose differently. I moved $50,000 into a community fund for veterans' home repairs, a cause Evelyn would have smiled at. I updated my living trust, making sure the $240,000 in savings and whatever equity remained in the house after I was gone would go toward service and the church. I wanted no cracks left for anyone to exploit. I wrote a line in my notebook that day. I don't need an apology to breathe. I need a plan to live. And I repeated it to myself until the words became steady. Caleb wrote me from prison once. The letter carried no remorse, only blame, words bent around his own anger. I did not tear it up. I did not answer. I placed it in an envelope marked "Do Not Open" and tucked it in the fireproof box. That was where his voice would stay. Naomi, on the other hand, filed for divorce. She came by one afternoon with a basket of muffins and left it on my porch with a small note. It said, "Thank you for telling the truth." We didn't talk about the garage or the jars. We didn't need to. A small change came into my life when I began volunteering on Saturdays at St. Luke's, serving coffee for families waiting outside the ICU. At first, it was just something to fill the hours, but slowly I began to know their faces, their stories, their fragile hope. One widower, Mr. Dwyer, taught me how to tie fishing flies during a quiet afternoon, his fingers moving with a patience I admired. He mentioned he was planning a trip to the lake I used to take Caleb to when he was a boy. He asked if I wanted to join him. I said yes, not because of the fishing, but because I wanted to remember that lake in a different light. I sold the larger house and bought a modest condo for $200,000 near the park. No stairs, just a single floor. The porch faces a row of red maples that catch the evening sun like fire. The HOA is quiet, and the neighbors are kind. It was not the home where I raised my son, but it was a place where I could breathe. I told myself as I unpacked the last box, I finally found a place where I belong. Caleb, I heard through Naomi, worked in the prison library. He kept his head down, committed no infractions, But even there, his thoughts were chained to property. He asked her how much the house had been appraised at, as if numbers were still the only language he could speak. Naomi shook her head when she told me, almost in disbelief. His cousin, the one who supplied the roots, was under investigation for unlicensed extraction. The landscaping company folded. Consequences have a way of rippling farther than you think. And so my life moved into a different rhythm. I trimmed the maples in the fall, I brewed coffee strong enough to clear the morning fog, and I sat with neighbors who shared their own stories of family. Some were lighter, some heavier, but all carried the same thread. That family is not always who shares your blood, but who shares your respect. I told myself, family isn't blood you fear, it's people who respect your boundaries. There were lessons I carried forward, lessons I hope others hear when they listen to my story. For parents, I say this: love your children, but do not sacrifice your safety or your dignity to keep a family photo neat. Protect what you've built, because enabling harm is not love. For children, I say, remember what was given to you. Remember the tuition checks, the down payments, the sacrifices you never saw. Betrayal doesn't just wound, it destroys the very bridge you may one day need to cross back home. And for all of us living in this hurried world, I say, character is the one asset no one can inherit or steal. Guard it, because once lost, no amount of money can buy it back. One small event deepened this truth for me. A letter arrived in the mail from Evelyn's sister. Inside was an old photograph, one I had never seen before. It showed Evelyn standing by the porch swing, younger than I remembered, holding Caleb as a toddler on her hip. On the back, she had written, "Build a life where love is heavier than money." I placed it in a frame on the mantel of my new condo, right beside the cross from our wedding. That photograph became my daily reminder that I was not living just to outlast betrayal, but to honor the love that had once built me. Each evening I sat on the swing with my coffee, watching the red maples shift in the light. I kept the string trick on my doorframe for a month longer than I needed, a small thread that told me whether someone had crossed my boundary. Then one morning I peeled it away and smiled, because safety was no longer about catching intruders. Safety was about trusting myself to hold the line. I whispered once into the evening air, "Evelyn, I'm all right." And I meant it. I didn't need Caleb's apology. I didn't need reconciliation written in someone else's script. I had truth, I had peace, and I had the strength to say no when no was the only answer. To anyone listening, especially those in their 60s and 70s who know the weight of sacrifice, I say this: you do not owe anyone your safety to keep the family picture perfect. Choose truth. Choose peace. The rest will learn to live with it. The swing rocked steadily, finally quiet, and I let myself believe that every day forward would be proof that I had chosen right. The story has come to an end. I hope it has brought you valuable lessons and insights. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next video. Goodbye, and see you again.